Objects accelerate towards the ground at 9.8 meters per second squared. That's an indisputable fact. And it is also an indisputable fact that any acceleration requires a force to produce it. This is how cars drive, planes fly, people walk, cats jump. It's how literally all motion works.
I'm sorry, Professor Dave. What did you say again?
Indisputable fact. And it is also an indisputable fact that any acceleration requires a force to produce it.
That's what I thought you said. It is an indisputable fact that any acceleration requires a force to produce it. Exactly. So therefore, without any force, there can be no acceleration. Like you said yourself, it is an indisputable fact that any acceleration requires a force to produce it.
Second law says that you cannot have an acceleration without a force.
Newton's first and second law do not say that.
No acceleration.
So, I told FTFE many times during that debate that an acceleration requires a force, that you need a force to produce an acceleration.
It is also an indisputable fact that any acceleration requires a force to produce it.
Second law says that you cannot have an acceleration without a force.
Newton's first and second law do not say that.
No acceleration.
He denies that's what Newton's law says, even though he didn't even know what Newton's law was and had to look it up. And even then, after reading it and talking about it, he still didn't understand it.
I follow all of Newton's laws and none of them contradict each other.
Okay, you follow all of Newton's laws. So what is Newton's first and second law? That an acceleration is caused by a force. Sorry, I'm sorry.
Wait, Newton's first law is that an acceleration is caused by a force. Is that really what it is?
Yes, his first and second law says that in order to change direction, or in order to change speed, or in order to accelerate, in order to move,
Newton's first
in order
law,
to stop, you need a force.
I'll tell you what, could you cite me, could you quote me specifically Newton's first law?
I just did.
No, you didn't. You just made up a straw man of the Newton's first law.
No, I didn't. Newton's first law tells you that if you basically without a force.
No, I don't want basically.
Stop.
I don't want basically what it tells you. I want you to quote me Newton's first law.
And I'm trying to tell you, but again,
no. Specifically the words that Newton used, not your interpretation, not what it says. What specifically is Newton's first law?
That if a body is at rest or moving at a constant speed in a straight line, it will stay at rest or keep moving in a straight line at a constant speed unless acted upon by a force, which you don't have with Einstein. Correct, exactly.
Yep, Einstein gives you the acceleration, that's fine.
You just debunked yourself.
No, I really didn't. Einstein gives you the acceleration. Acceleration and mass equals force. And if you have a force, you can have something acted upon. I'm talking. If you have an acceleration and you have a mass, therefore you have a force. And according to Newton's first law states if a body is at rest or moving at a constant speed in a straight line, it will remain at rest or keep moving in a straight line at constant speed unless it is acted upon by a force. Mass times acceleration. Mass times acceleration equals a force. There is your force acting upon it. Boom. Done.
No.
You not understanding that doesn't change things. Yes.
No.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Newton's first law
says
at a constant speed, unless acted upon by a force.
And how do you get a force? You have mass times acceleration. Force equals mass times acceleration. Mass times acceleration equals a force. Therefore, you have a force that can act upon something moving in a straight line at a constant speed.
No.
Yes. Just because you're too fucking thick to understand doesn't change it.
Again, you're not understanding. Newton's law
says the Dunning-Kruger queen of the world who doesn't understand that F equals ma.
Nobody's saying F doesn't equal ma. What I'm saying is...
You are apparently. You're saying I don't have a force, even though I have a mass and acceleration.
You're interrupting me again.
You are saying...
You can't let me finish because you know you're wrong.
Gravity is not a force. Any acceleration requires a force to produce it. Therefore, if there is no force to produce it, there will be no acceleration.
It is also an indisputable fact that any acceleration requires a force to produce it.
So here, I say to Professor Phil Bell, is it possible you could answer a few questions of mine? He says, list your questions here and be specific, please. I say, okay, maybe we should start with one at a time. I don't want to overwhelm you with too many questions. So first one, Newton's second law is often stated as F equals ma, which means the force acting on an object is equal to the mass of the object times its acceleration. This means the more mass an object has, the more force you need to accelerate it. And the greater the force, the greater the object's acceleration. Copied and pasted from Google. So my question is, mass times acceleration is the force acting up on that object. So let's say I wanted to accelerate a mass that's 10 kilograms at 9 meters per second. Then I do 10 times 9 equals 90. So I would need 90 newtons of force to accelerate a 10 kilogram mass at 9 meters per second, right? He says, good so far. So he's agreeing. So, yeah, F equals ma basically tells you how much force you need to accelerate that object. So, if an object is accelerating at a certain rate and it has a certain mass, then you know what force or how much force is acting on that object. So, again, if I had an object, as in the example here, that is 10 kilograms, and I wanted to accelerate that object at 9 meters per second, I have to do the mass times the acceleration. So 10 kilograms times 9 meters per second. Therefore, I require 90 newtons of force to make that acceleration occur. So 90 newtons of force will make that mass accelerate at 9 meters per second. That is what F equals ma means, not what FTFE thinks it means.
Second law says that you cannot have an acceleration without a force.
Newton's first and second law do not say that.
No acceleration.
It is also an indisputable fact that any acceleration requires a force to produce it.
So, Google agrees with me that F equals ma, that you need a force to cause the acceleration. That the greater the force, the greater the acceleration, because the force is what causes the acceleration. Professor Phil Bell agrees with me that if I have a 10 kilogram mass and I want to accelerate that 10 kilogram mass at 9 meters per second, that I need a 90 Newton force to produce that. Professor Dave agrees with me that it is an indisputable fact that an acceleration requires a force to produce it. The acceleration is produced by the force. It requires a force to produce the acceleration. So we went round and round and round for 3 hours about this, about Newton's first and second law, that you didn't even know that you had to Google. Round and round FTFE for 3 hours. 3 hours me trying to teach you Newton's laws. 3 hours me trying to teach you basic physics. 3 hours of you being wrong. And then your followers basically that far up your bum and don't know physics and are that ignorant just like yourself of physics and Newton's laws of motion, that they was on your side because they are just as ignorant as you are. They don't know Newton's laws either. They don't understand physics, just like you don't understand physics, which is why they follow you, because they don't understand physics. They think you do, but you don't. Like I said, Google agrees with me. Professor Phil Bell agrees with me. Professor Dave agrees with me. And you deny Newton's laws.
Second law says that you cannot have an acceleration without a force.
Newton's first and second law do not say that.
No acceleration.
3 hours of going round and round and round, and yet you still did not understand.
It is also an indisputable fact that any acceleration requires a force to produce it.
No amount of evidence will ever persuade an idiot. No amount of evidence, it seems. No amount of showing you 100 or 1,000 proofs will ever get your blinded eyes to see. Oh, no amount of evidence will ever persuade an idiot. No amount of evidence, it seems.
So FTFE, I expect you to correct yourself. I expect you to do a live stream correcting yourself, telling your followers that you were wrong, because your followers now think that you were right, which means that if they teach their kids or if they talk to somebody about Newton's laws, that they are going to be telling them the wrong thing, because you don't understand Newton's laws, which is, you didn't even know Newton's law, which is why you had to Google it. But yeah, they pay you money, they give you money, they stick up for you, They're so far up your bum. They're ignorant, just like you are. And I expect you now to correct your ignorance and correct their ignorance, because they now think that you were right, and you're not. An acceleration does not cause itself. An acceleration is caused by a force according to Newton's first and second law. So I expect you to address this, and I expect you to correct yourself and correct your followers, because you owe it to them. They give you money, they subscribe to you. You got like what, 50,000 followers? That's a lot of people who are going to be wrong now because you were wrong and they think you were right. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, you need to correct yourself and you need to explain to them that you were wrong, and that actually what F equals ma under Newton's first and second law actually does mean, because you're wrong and you owe it to them. They follow you to learn physics, a lot of them. So yeah, you owe it to them to correct them and to make sure that they are right on Newton's laws.
Most of you address this problem by simply listing two words, density and buoyancy. Well, I hate to break it to you guys, but these are not forces. Forces are vectors. They have a magnitude, which means a numerical amount, and a direction, which means they have to point somewhere. Density is simply mass per unit volume, or how much matter sits in a particular space. It doesn't point anywhere. And buoyancy is simply a measurement of an object's tendency to float. So allow me to repeat, these are not forces.
So you say density and buoyancy, these are not forces. Correct. I agree with you again, Professor Dave. Density and buoyancy are not forces. So, what was it that you said again? It's an indisputable fact that any acceleration requires a force. Well, we know gravity isn't a force, and we know buoyancy isn't a force. As you say yourself, these are not forces, talking about density and buoyancy. And we know gravity isn't a force. So therefore, gravity isn't a force, and buoyancy isn't a force. Now, what do you say about acceleration and forces, Professor Dave?
It is also an indisputable fact that any acceleration requires a force to produce it.
Exactly, Professor Dave. So, it is an indisputable fact that any acceleration requires a force to produce it under Newton's first and second laws. So, any acceleration requires a force to produce the acceleration. So, if buoyancy isn't a force, then there can be no acceleration, because buoyancy isn't a force. As you yourself says, it is an indisputable fact that any acceleration requires a force. Buoyancy isn't a force, therefore it cannot cause acceleration. Just like gravity is not a force, therefore it cannot cause an acceleration. And as for buoyancy, if I had something less dense in a more dense medium, and it was at the bottom of that medium, I was holding it at the bottom, and I release it, and it goes up, that's accelerating, it's moving, it's a motion, like you said. Any motion requires a force to produce it. Therefore, like you said, buoyancy is not a force. Therefore, buoyancy did not cause the object to accelerate up, did it? Because it's not a force, as you say. And yes, density is not a force. I agree. Density is just mass divided by volume. The problem is, we don't say, well, some flat earthers say density and buoyancy, yes. But me, myself and Sleeping Warrior and a lot of other flat earthers tell you that it's relative density. And relative density does produce a force, and it does produce a direction, and it does produce a magnitude. And yeah, basically relative density is the force, not density and buoyancy, as you said yourself. Those are not forces. I agree with you. But relative density disequilibrium is a force. Relative density gives the direction and disequilibrium gives the acceleration. So that is the force. Now, again, you say buoyancy is not a force. Therefore, buoyancy cannot create motion according to you. As you said yourself, it is an indisputable fact that any acceleration requires a force to produce it. Buoyancy, as you say yourself, is not a force. Therefore, it cannot cause an object to accelerate upwards in a more dense medium. So, yeah, buoyancy is not the reason things go up. Gravity is not the reason things go down, because as you say yourself, again, it is an indisputable fact that any acceleration requires a force to produce it. And as you say yourself, buoyancy is not a force and gravity is not a force. Therefore, yeah, you don't have a force to produce the motion, do you? Again, RDD does produce a force, does provide the force. So, yeah,